Welcome to the Kent ISD Literacy Leaders and Coaches Network Remote Edition. We're excited to bring you our second episode of the LLCN Brief. Your reaction to our first episode was overwhelmingly positive. Thank you so much for that. We're back for more. So here we go with our second session. My name again is Mark Raffler, and I'm the ELA and Social Studies Consultant for Kent ISD, and I'm joined with...
My name is Sarah Shoemaker, and I am an early literacy coach for Kent ISD. In this episode, we will spend some time exploring the concept of literacy coaching.
The Michigan Department of Education is continuing to allocate resources toward the use of literacy coaches. This increased funding is sure to have an impact across the state, and we're really starting to see it take hold here in Kent County. The essential coaching practices in elementary literacy are providing us some guidance. These coaching practices are from the General Education Leadership Network, also known as GELN, in a collaborative with the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, known as MESA. Even with the guidance of the coaching practices, though, we know there is more to learn about providing support with literacy coaching.
With an emphasis on literacy coaches, naturally comes the question, what support might these coaches offer? As Kent ISD continues to provide guidance and resources around intentional literacy coach implementation, we want to share with you this new resource. No More Random Acts of Literacy Coaching from the Not This But That series, written by Erin Brown and Susan Lalier. Joining us today are the authors of this newly published book, Erin Brown, the Early Literacy Professional Learning Grant Project Coordinator for Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, and the Muskegon ISD ELA Consultant. Erin has more than 20 years of experience as a classroom teacher, literacy specialist, literacy coach, and consultant. Her current role includes facilitating a professional learning network of literacy coaches across Michigan. While working with children is her first passion, she is honored to now learn alongside literacy educators, focusing on research-supported instruction and professional learning that is as close to the real work of classrooms as possible. Also joining us today is Dr. Susan Lalier. Susan K. Lalier received her doctoral degree in Reading, Language, and Literacy Disabilities from Harvard University and is an associate professor emeritus at Northern Illinois University. As a university professor, she taught graduate courses in literacy, leadership, and literacy coaching. Prior to joining the university faculty, she was an elementary school teacher and principal. In addition, Dr. Lalier has engaged in research to examine the relationship between literacy coaching and student achievement. She is the author of numerous articles and the co-author of 3 books about literacy coaching. The Common Core Coaching Book, Strategies to Help Teachers Address the K-5 ELA Standards, Collaborative Coaching for Disciplinary Literacy, Strategies to Support Teachers in Grades 6 through 12, and No More Random Acts of Literacy Coaching. Susan has also provided ongoing professional development in the area of literacy coaching to several school districts within the greater Chicago area. Since 2016, she has worked with Michigan educators in the development of a statewide system of literacy coaching. Susan and Erin, you have a newly published book that walks us from the foundation of the essential coaching practices into intentionality in coaching moves on a daily basis. Talk to us about this recent publication.
This book is within the Not This But That series from Heinemann. All of the books in that series are really about that intentionality you mentioned, about whatever practice is featured. And in just a second, I'll invite Susan to talk a little bit more about that structure. But really, when we think about coaching and anything really in the educational world right now, there's just a lot of uncertainty for schools. And this book was completed before COVID-19, but so much about what we know about the benefits and the research around literacy coaching really matter, and even more right now. They truly have an impact on schools. So there's a lot to learn about the specifics of what happens when coaches in schools can see what other schools are doing and how they're making decisions about their work. There are so many examples in the world of coaches and teams creating programs and matching services that helps literacy coaching fit right within a system. And this book is really a tribute to those coaches and teams of educators who are always striving to support student learning in those really creative and innovative ways, especially now. Susan, what would you add to that?
Well, I'd like to share a little bit about the structure of the book. The books in the Not This But That series have several common elements. First, they're always co authored by a practitioner and a researcher. And that's why Erin, who has served as literacy coach, and I, who have conducted research about literacy coaching, were asked to co author this book. Section 1 of these books is always titled Not This. We know that coaches can fall into a routine of providing in the moment, for the moment coaching as they respond to teacher requests. And while this in the moment coaching may meet teachers' immediate needs, it usually doesn't result in enhanced teacher practice or improved student learning. So instead of this in the moment coaching, we advocate the idea of intentional coaching. So in section 1, we discuss 5 obstacles to implementing intentional coaching. Section 2 is always titled Why Not? And this section focuses on the research underlying the recommended practices. So we're sharing research that delineates the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions needed to be an effective coach. We also discuss research-supported coaching activities and the vital role played by administrators in supporting coaching programs and coaches. Section 3 is always titled But That. In our case, the but that is how to apply the research so that coaching is intentional, leading to enhanced teacher practice and improved student learning. Erin focuses on effective communication between coaches and teachers, coaching cycles, working with administrators, and being literacy leaders.
It certainly sounds like there's a lot of information in the book for us to work through. If I'm new to coaching, and so is my district, how would you recommend we get started?
Great question. So coaches are so service minded and they just really want to hit the ground running and meet every single need. But it's always time well spent to wait and develop a vision for the coaching program. And that can be the coach and district leaders, building leaders, really just taking some time and saying, what would be our dream for this work? What would be our dream result by the end of this year? And developing that vision and some clarity about how coaching is going to be described in a school. Of course, if it's new to a staff and that kind of communication, while it's co-developed with a coach, it definitely needs to come from the principal so that the principal's really laying out the hope and the quality of the coaching that will be provided. And then sharing that vision with teachers. And so we always want to start strong in that way and have a clear definition of what the work will be so that people can take advantage of it as soon as possible. But quickly after that, it's always helpful for the coach to observe in many, many classrooms and become familiar. And again, this can be communicated by the administrator that this is kind of how we're going to get started, because the coach really deserves to be able to see the instructional practices and how the curriculum materials look across the grades. So even if the coach coming from within that district or that building and they know their grade level or the grade levels that they taught and how the curriculum looks there, it is such a good investment of time for the coach to be able to spend some time across the grades that he or she will be serving in and really watch student learning, really watch how the practices grow across the grades and how they're unique. And this isn't to observe teachers and, start to make judgments about practice that way. It's really to watch kids and get a better feel for the literacy environment of the entire school. And then while that's happening, the coach is developing those relationships with teachers, and there's a variety of interactions that are happening. A coach can, provide and suggest that they could come in and read aloud in each classroom. That might be how those observations happen, where the coach comes in or remotely connects and is doing some kind of lesson or read aloud in the classroom and then sticking around or conferring with individual students about their reading and writing and just being in that environment. Or even, as those conversations develop right at the beginning, helping a teacher organize assessment data or plan a tricky whole class lesson that's coming up, or a small group where students have common needs. So there's a lot of ways that coaches are observing systematically across the grades that they'll support, but also starting to build those relationships around research-supported practices for coaching. And I think the last thing is just that, as those observations are happening, it's always important to come back as a leadership team, a literacy leadership team, if that exists, or a group of leaders and the coach, and really be able to talk non-judgmentally about the literacy program, the literacy observations across grade levels, and think closely about that school improvement plan or the school-wide literacy goal. Those are established, and if not, to establish them, and then to determine together as a team how coaching can be situated right within inside that school-wide goal. And we know that when coaching is that systematic and at least tied to some areas of focus based on data, that coaching will have a greater impact, a lasting impact. It can better build capacity in a school when there is that common focus. Not that all coaching will be directly in line with an explicit school improvement goal, but the more that those kinds of sessions can happen where there's a team around the work, it really assures that this is a program that is woven into the real world, the real context of a school, and that it will have a lasting impact beyond any coaching cycle that will happen.
Yeah, that's appreciated, that idea of patience, planning, and you bring up the leadership piece as well. And especially for our audience, where sometimes the whole idea of the coaching, they're very unsure of it, right? It's possibly a new thing. So those are some really good tips, especially around that idea of team, having a team to work through the literacy piece. So thank you.
Thank you for talking us through laying that foundation and defining that role so that coaches can become objective observers to build relationships and move forward with collaborative goals. When we're thinking about literacy coaching, what are 2 or 3 of the most important considerations that a coach should keep in mind for success?
Well, Sarah, I think one of the most important keys to success is that coaches and teachers have a shared understanding about the role of the coach. Erin referred briefly to this in her response to the last question. I'd like to elaborate a little bit more. Coaches and principals often have a shared understanding about the role of the coach because they've held several meetings about the coaching program. Teachers, however, might not have that shared understanding. So it's important when beginning to work with teachers that coaches carefully explain what their role is and what it is not. They often explain that coaches are people with whom teachers can think and problem solve, really focusing on issues related to student learning. Coaches usually explicitly state that they are not evaluators. Evaluating is the job of the principal or the assistant principal. And tied to this is the importance of confidentiality. To build a trusting relationship with a coach, teachers have to be assured that the coaches will not discuss individual teachers with the principal, and that coaches don't expect principals to discuss individual teachers either. So confidentiality is very critical to developing a trusting relationship between coaches and teachers. However, coaches do want to build instructional capacity by encouraging teachers to share successful instructional practices with their colleagues. This could be done during professional learning that's held during faculty meetings or at grade level meetings. And I'm sure, Erin, you have a couple of more ideas about what are some important considerations to keep in mind for success?
Yes, definitely. I remember as a coach that I'd have almost a couple things in the back of my mind always. So when I'd be in a tricky situation and I wouldn't know what to do, I could always go back to them. And just a couple of those would be to remind myself I can always go back to literacy research if there's a question I don't know. And it's okay to model, that I don't know, and that let me just take a moment and go back and do a little looking for you, because it shows that, we as a staff are really focused on research guiding our way. So that'd be one thing, just that I remember. I was a coach for a long time, and right now I support coaches. And that whole modeling of being able to always pause and say, let's look at the research. What does the research say about this? It was just a nice strategy for myself, but it was real, it was true, and it was important. Another thing I remembered, whenever I entered into any interaction, and it's always a privilege to enter into an interaction with a teacher. When we can frame our work with teachers through the lens that there's amazing things happening, and that teachers' identities are all unique, students' identities are so important in the work that we're doing together, it would help me remember that not all teachers are the same, and that there are so many ways to provide coaching support, that when a teacher, requests support, or if we're entering into a longer term coaching cycle around a goal they might have, that some teachers might be more at the beginning of that trust, or they might not need that much support. So it's okay and it's not random, to know that some support is shorter and it's just in time support. It's exactly what the teacher needs to either get unstuck or have a thought partner around something, and then they're on their way and we're available to continue to support them. And sometimes teachers might need more support, and as our time allows, then we can engage in a full coaching cycle around, a database goal. But just always remembering that every one of our colleagues are unique, and there's no one way that any of this work goes, and that's okay, because that is acknowledging that identity matters in all of this work, especially student identity. And I guess the last tip would just be to always remember to follow through with those commitments. Someone might catch you in the hall as you're heading to a co-planning session with a teacher, but it's so important that teacher has, determined that this is the time that they're going to work with you as the coach. And so we really keep our focus and not let ourselves be distracted in that moment, so that we can make those commitments. And at the same time, we always have answers on the tip of our tongue, like give me an email, or let me check back in with you at the end of the day. I'm heading to an appointment right now with a teacher, and that's really important to me, but I'm going to get back with you, or please send me a message about that. And that adherence to our commitments just always helps our colleagues know that we'll be trustworthy, and that we are as focused on their goals with them as they are.
Thank you, Erin and Susan, for reminding us that our situations may be unique, but that going back to the basis of research, both in literacy practices and in coaching practices, will serve those individuals in our areas. Thank you.
It absolutely helps to have these considerations in mind. With these ideas, I still, as a coach, I want to have the most impact I possibly can to improve student achievement in that smallest amount of time. How can I accomplish that?
Yes, as a teacher, you're able to perfect that craft, and then in a coaching role, different. Yeah, great question. Well, there are some things, that are tied to coaching research that can help us know that we at least are spending the majority of our time in things that will probably have the highest likelihood of impacting student achievement. And some of them, we might have talked about before, like tying coaching in general to school improvement plans or school-wide goals, just so that all staff are kind of pulling in that same direction. And we know that we have many different strategies and activities that we are applying to that goal, and we can measure that, including coaching. And I think then, even when we're working with teams or grade levels or individuals, that goal setting piece is really important, and really getting down to a goal that's meaningful for coaching. And so that size of the goal matters, the data we're going to use, and even if that's really specific data, that data that we're going to use to measure our impact together as we try some things instructionally, can definitely help us focus on student achievement in a small amount of time, because depending on that size of the goal and the finite measurement that we're going to use to observe students and and track their growth will really give us that story of our impact, even at the tiniest level of a coaching cycle. And then just being careful with our time, because it's so easy to get busy with a lot of things as a coach. So we want to always spend the majority of our time on those coaching activities that we know will have an impact, which are co-planning, modeling as teachers choose, observing students, observing to get feedback as teachers invite, and using assessment results to drive instruction. And those coaching activities have found to be predictors of student achievement. And then just one other thing, so coaching cycles are one way that we can be really intentional with our support. But after a coaching cycle, like what's next? As a coach moves on busily to the next thing, how is the coach still providing support, even if it's not the same depth of support? And maybe that means that when a coaching cycle is wrapping up, that the coach and teacher are planning some action steps that the teacher can use to continue implementing and monitoring how any practices are continuing to support students. And, again, even if that support is being released in some way, there can be some communication cycles around how that work is still going. And that's all just to build capacity, and under the belief that, of course, the teacher is going to be capable and continue to learn and observe kids and respond to kids. And as the coach makes themselves available to listen about how it's going and to check in, and if there are any specific pieces that the coach is going to continue to do lightly to support that teacher, it all just kind of makes it more systematic and more organized for the teachers to know that they've got this, and the coach isn't that far away if needed.
Yeah, that really helps to acknowledge that true difference from that classroom teacher to the coach. I think that's a really good point. And then consider those key components in the research around coaching, including that coaching cycle.
Due to the pandemic, we have modified how we deliver many services in education. What insights might you offer in regards to what this looks like for coaching?
Well, Sarah, I've been very honored to work with several coaches in Illinois over the past year. And many of these coaches have found that facilitating grade level meetings has been an effective way to support teachers throughout the pandemic. Last spring, when remote learning was put in place in their schools, the coaches decided to hold grade level meetings via Zoom or Google Meet. During these meetings, coaches and teachers were able to develop schedules for remote learning. They determined one or two tools that they would all teach their students, and they co-planned both whole group and small group lessons. Then this fall, some of those schools returned to face-to-face instruction, but the grade level meetings continued, with coaches and teachers discussing things like how are we going to carry out instruction in COVID-restricted classrooms? So working together, they found solutions to providing effective read-alouds, how they were going to run small group instruction, and even enabling partner activities. So I would highly recommend that coaches think about the ways grade level meetings can help teachers solve the problems that arise during remote or socially distanced instruction. Another idea is that sometimes coaches feel they can't engage in coaching cycles remotely. But I think coaches should be confident that they can continue to effectively engage in coaching cycles with teachers. For example, they can hold those goal-setting meetings that Erin was talking about earlier and co-planning meetings via Zoom or Google Meet. And we have seen coaches join synchronous sessions or record asynchronous sessions to model or co-teach. And if the coach can't join a synchronous session to observe, the teacher can always record the session so the coach can watch the instruction at a later time. And of course, coaches and teachers can hold their post-instruction conferences via Zoom or Google Meet. So you see, it's really possible to conduct all aspects of a coaching cycle during remote learning. And it's also important to know that there is research that indicates the impact of virtual coaching on teacher practice and student learning can be similar to coaching done in face-to-face sessions. However, as with face-to-face coaching, we want to make sure that that virtual coaching is intentional and well-planned.
So we have the opportunity here, Susan, to take what we're doing in person settings and to make it work in virtual settings. And maybe this is a shift in how we see education in the future, not just during this time of pandemic, but to be productive with grade level meetings where we can't always be in the same place at the same time, or to do some modeling and recording of that modeling to use during other times. It seems like there's a lot of collaborative solutions here. Thanks for offering your insight.
We've asked some questions and appreciate all the expertise that you both have offered. So, as we conclude the interview today, what have we not asked about that is important to highlight here?
I kind of alluded to this, but it is so easy for educators to get really, really busy in the day to day, and specifically for coaches, because, all day long you're supporting other people's goals. And so, one just reminder or tip would be that it's always an important thing to protect time on our calendars for our own work, time to set our personal goals, our professional learning goals, some goals around certain coaching skills that we want to enhance or learn more about through collaboration maybe with other coaches. And that kind of leads me to thinking about the importance of participating in networks with people in coaching roles, whether formally or informally, so that coaches who can often be, it can be a lonely role, maybe you're the only coach in a district or in a building, and while you're really tightly collaborating with a lot of other colleagues and peers, no one quite understands what your work is like another coach. So I would just, end with that reminder that we can always value that time for our own personal learning, our own personal goal setting, and achieving those action steps towards those goals, and keeping that long-term view in mind, and assuring that our calendar does give us time to focus in those long-term visionary ways that will feed us. And, in today's setting, with the complexity of instruction and all of the sophisticated ways that we are thinking about meeting students' needs, just a final reminder that coaches can support teachers in meeting those needs in so many important ways. And we need each other to do that within a school community, within that ecosystem, but also we need to keep ourselves, fed and grounded in what really matters for the long term. So thanks for asking that great question.
Yeah, we appreciate you bringing that perspective up for consideration for the learning of our group. That's a very important element to keep in mind that hadn't necessarily been brought to the fore, although you talked around that idea. But overall, to both of you, we've certainly been given a lot of great next steps to use in advancing literacy coaching here in our county, and from the greater work that you've done really across the state. So for that work from a lot of us across the state, and especially the county and our Literacy Leadership and Coaching Network, thank you very much for that.
Yes, this interview is the beginning of our learning around no more random acts of literacy coaching in our county. Look for more dialogue coming soon. Thank you for joining us for this LLCN brief today. We appreciate Erin Brown and Dr. Susan Lalier's insight into coaching. If you want to learn more about intentional literacy coaching, check out No More Random Acts of Literacy Coaching, published by Heinemann.
We're looking for your suggestions on topics as well as questions that you may have related to literacy. Please take the time to let us know what you want to learn more about through the Google form bit.ly/LLCN topics. That's bit.ly/L, and then all lowercase topics with no space. We look forward to connecting with you again in the near future. Thanks for listening. If there were any resources or other things that you wanted to get a hold of that you heard throughout this cast, you can visit our website to get to access to those resources. That can also be found at a bit.ly/, capital L, capital L, capital C, capital N, and then all lowercase resources with no space in between. Thanks again.